Welcome back, folks. Today I have a friend that I just had some time with in person, real time, Mr. Ryan Levesque, who will be hard to easily describe. What I'll share as a summary is that 3 years ago we met through a Front Row Dads event, had a very meaningful, vulnerable conversation. For me, it was like meeting a long lost friend. Um, Developed that friendship. I visited him and his family in person, and we just got back from a band retreat with some of our other close Front Row Dad buddies. And we tend to jam and align on all kinds of things, which is what we're going to do today. So thank you, Ryan, for creating space for this. And how would you introduce yourself? Who is Ryan Levesque?
Well, first of all, I've been looking forward to this conversation for
Yeah.
some time, and it's perfect timing because, yeah, having a chance to hang out together in person always makes it more special, more memorable, and I think a more interesting conversation for everyone who'll be listening to this here today. How would I describe myself? Gosh, I think I have a few different identities. So I would say I have an identity as a father. I've got two boys that are the center of my life. I would identify as an entrepreneur. I've built and scaled and sold multiple companies. I have an identity as an investor. Big part of my identity and how I generate wealth and income as an investor. And I have an identity as a farmer. We live on a farm that we started as a family where we raise and grow a significant portion, almost 80% of the food that we consume as a family. So try to wear all those hats, and I think there'll be some interesting conversations that comes from our discussion here today.
You do wear all those hats. I know because I visited the farm. It's extraordinary. It's inspired me to uh, evolve into what our buddies would call micro farming, which is some vegetables and fruits and struggling plants around my yard. But I am passionate about it, and I am inspired by what I realized at your farm or experienced at your farm, which was just special. The other thing is that the word that has shown up since I met you is real. And we've ridden some real waves together. You have sparked a lot of real curiosity for me and many other humans. And the farm is one example. Just the other day, we were jamming. You were telling me about how you've cultivated some cool things for your kiddos to learn about investing, the business expertise, and just things you've navigated is very real. And so that word, when I think of Ryan, I think of real. And where would you go with that? How would you respond to embodying real?
Gosh, man, it's such a great question. And I think, when we even just approach that word from an inquisitive position and just begin questioning what is real.
Mhm.
What does that even mean if
Hmm.
something is real versus artificial? And I've been sitting with that quite a bit. And one of the sort of forces that inspired the move from living in a urban or suburban environment to moving to the mountains of Vermont, where we're just surrounded by nature and raising and growing our own food, was this realization that after I turned 40, that I'd spent the first really half of my life with my face in front of a screen.
Hmm.
And I wanted to spend the second half of my life with my hands in the dirt.
Hmm.
And that's a metaphor for what I mean by existing in the physical world. And I think that so much of our lives increasingly is experienced in an abstract way via proxy, meaning we're watching something through a screen. We're not actually doing the thing. We aren't eating the real food. We're actually eating an approximation of what that food is.
Right.
And I've been writing more and more. I write a weekly newsletter by hand called The Digital Contrarian, where I share some of these maybe unpopular and in some cases contrarian points of view that in a world that's increasingly driven by algorithms and the artificial, that a return to the artisanal the authentic and the real, I believe is where it's at. I believe that's what we're craving more and more of. And when I find myself immersed in these experiences, whether it's hiking in the Ozarks with some friends, or this morning doing farm chores and feeding the cows and feeding the chickens and repairing the tractor and just getting out there in the real world, that it's increasingly something that fuels me in a major way. And when I experience this with others, I think there's something that we're missing in modern society when we don't spend that time with our hands in the dirt. So for
Mm.
me, it's something I've been writing about that I call the return to real movement. And I think that's an interesting idea that's taking shape. And when I talk about this idea, I believe it's a movement that's taking shape in the world today. And I think there are some macro forces at play that are bringing this to light and creating a void and a desire for more of this, where people want more of the hands in the dirt experience to balance that algorithmic artificial experience that most of us have on a day-to-day basis.
Dude, yes. Yes, 100%. So I want to reflect a few things, which is also going to accommodate my bias, my experience, my lens. I think many of us discount the impact that the digital screen world has on our system. And I don't just mean nervous system, I mean our home. I
Mm,
mean the health of our business. For example, I have a really good friend out here that I partnered with years ago, and it occurred to me at one point in the business, and we shared some fun, but humor play around this, that we were creating funny money.
mm,
As in, the value we were creating did offer someone value, but it was just these digits and numbers moving, these clicks. And that's fine. I'm not suggesting that it's wrong or nefarious or anything, but it's not real. At
mhm,
least for me in this phase of life, is that I've transitioned into knowing what's very real, physically real, emotionally real, spiritually real, and a lot of the digital world does not impact me that way.
mm,
Some of it does, to be clear. So there is utility in technology and the screens that we use, et cetera. I'm not saying that, but I just got to a point and I'm navigating deeper into sort of the dichotomy, even though they can blend, and knowing that when I put my hands in the dirt, to your point, that's real. It's like this form of nourishment that I've never encountered being on the computer and having some, dopamine spike. So thank you for that. The other thing that you mentioned is this concept of world order, which you've been writing about. Your newsletter is exceptional, by the way. So if anyone hasn't checked out your newsletter, I'm a huge advocate for it. We'll link to all that stuff. But tell me about this. Tell me about the shifts you're seeing, the experience, this world order, the movement, etc.
yeah. So I think we are living in a very unique time where there are a confluence of forces that are hitting us all at once that together are creating a series of conditions that is why there's this craving for what it is that I'm describing.
Mhm.
And there are three thinkers that I'm going to reference that I think are all worth studying and following and reading their work extensively, to understand this at a much deeper level. And I'll do my absolute best to try to kind of convey what these forces are in the scope of this conversation. So the three thinkers that I want to reference are Ray Dalio,
Mhm.
Yuval Noah Harari, and Nathan Hagens. Now, Ray Dalio, among other things, talks about the changing world order. And as a student of history, as a hedge fund manager, so if you're not familiar, Ray Dalio, the most successful hedge fund manager of our generation,
Mhm.
Bridgewater Associates, and he wrote a book about 10, 15 years ago called Principles. And then he followed that up with a book a few years ago in the wake of COVID called Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order.
Mhm.
And what he writes about in this book and in his other work, videos and interviews and research papers that he's developed, is this idea that there are cycles that exist in the world. These are predictable cycles. These are economic, financial cycles that have repeated themselves going back 2,000 years. And we are in the middle of one of these cycles right now. And it's a way to understand why empires rise and fall.
Hmm.
And in our lifetime, the dominant empire of our era has been the United States Empire. Prior to that, it was the British Empire. Prior to that, it was the Dutch Empire. And you can go back further in time.
Mhm.
And that's largely what we've all experienced. And if you study the number of factors that determine what is the dominant world power at any given time, from rise in education, rise in innovation, rise in productivity, rise as a financial center, things like reserve currency status, which is what the United States dollar has at this point in time. What you'll find is that there's a predictable set of factors that correlate with the rise and a corresponding set of factors that correlate with the fall.
Hmm.
And while history, and Mark Twain is famous for saying history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme, what we're seeing now is a change in the world order, where the United States is in the early decline phase of its status as a world superpower. And of course, China is in the process of supplanting the United States as the dominant superpower. And that's where the changing world order takes place.
Hmm.
Now, in this decline phase, there's certain things that happen in a declining empire. One of those is a movement away from pure economic activity to the pursuit of the finer things in life. This is a predictable pattern that shows up over and over again. Every empire has experienced this. Now, at its extent, in the most bastardized version of that, it's decadence, which
Hmm.
is when we just go, crazy with, everything. And this shows up in the short cycle or the small cycle, where you see this happen in, for example, the Roaring Twenties. We experienced a level of decadence that led to a series of conditions that resulted in the Great Depression. Then we got out of the Great Depression. It was experienced in multiple ways in the United States and then in Europe, which led to World War II. We fought World War II, coming out of World War II. So these cycles show up repeatedly in what's called the small cycle or a short cycle, the short-term debt cycle. And it also shows up in what's called the big cycle.
Hmm.
Now, the big cycle is a much longer time horizon. It's 80 to 100 years that shows up. And the last time we experienced this in a big way was in the Great Depression. So we're due. We're due for this big cycle. Now, whether it's going to happen, a big cycle where you have a deleveraging event, which is a very disruptive economic set of circumstances.
Got it.
So talking about recession, depression, change in transfer of wealth, it's a big deal. No human being, except for the oldest of our population, has experienced this because the last time that this happened was 100 years ago, nearly 100 years ago. So we don't know what it feels like, and we have this bias toward understanding only what we've experienced in our lifetime. We think if good times have been good, like we have this bias toward that, right? So I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but that's some context.
Sure.
So in this decline phase, we are probably at some point, Dalio estimates that in the next 3 years, at some point, we are in store for this probably significant deleveraging event, which is going to be an economic major disruption, recession, likely a depression. And in big cycles, these depressive experiences typically last 2 to 3 years
Hmm.
historically. Like that's what it is. So it's not forever, but it's 2 years of some hard stuff.
Right.
So there's that dynamic that's at play right now.
And to be clear, it's hard stuff that I think just to emphasize for the audience, because I'm learning. One
Yep,
of your gifts is this ability to distill and teach rhyme. And so if someone's like me where they are not well versed in this, I want to emphasize that we haven't experienced this kind of hardship, which is pretty.
exactly. We haven't experienced it, right? And so, like, I don't want to get too in the weeds on the economic theory and the set of conditions that lead to this, but it has to do with deficit levels, government spending. It has to do with a number of different factors that together sort of don't guarantee that something is going to happen. It's sort of like how much of a risk do you have of having a heart attack? Well, the risk factors won't say exactly when you're going to have a heart attack, but if you're overweight and you have a family history of heart disease and you are of a certain ethnicity that has a higher propensity for having heart disease, all of those risk factors add up to tell you that mathematically speaking, you are likely to have a heart attack at some point in the next X amount of years. And it just takes a trigger event to
Mm.
be sort of like the lighter that lights the whole thing up.
Got it.
So that's where we are from an economic standpoint. Okay, great. Now
Mm.
let's shift gears to another thinker, Yuval Noah Harari, who wrote *Sapiens* and
Hmm.
*Homo Deus*, and most recently *Nexus*, and a number of other works surrounding this. And Harari spent a lot of time exploring the impact of AI, not just economic impact of AI, but from a philosophical standpoint, how AI really poses in many ways an existential threat to human supremacy in the world as the dominant organism. Again,
Hmm.
something that we've only experienced. We've only experienced man, carbon-based man, as the dominant species on planet Earth. We've not experienced anything else in anybody else's lifetime.
Hmm.
Now we have this rise of AI, and there's so many questions that it raises. And one of these questions that it raises is our supremacy. If we have a silicon-based life form in AI and eventually AGI, artificial general intelligence, that supplants a carbon-based human as the dominant, superorganism on planet Earth, what does that mean? What's our
Mm.
plan, right? What's our utility? If a computer, if a robot can do a better job at many, if not all, tasks that humans are believed to be the best at the world of completing. Where does that leave us? What's our place on this planet? What's our purpose? What's our meaning, right? So you've got that force that's showing up, and it shows up in a very tactical, practical way. Oh, we have jobs that are going to be lost because we don't need as many people to do the jobs that AI can do more quickly. We have retraining that's going to have to take place where if you have a job that AI is going to suddenly do, well, what are you going to do? Like, are you
Hmm.
going to be are you going to be unemployed? Are you going to be relying on some universal basic income? Or are you going to be retraining? If you're a radiologist and you learned how to spot, metastasis in MRI imagery, and now suddenly AI can do a better job of that than any human can do, what do? Well, you
Mm.
may still be a doctor, but you might not be doing what you trained for the last 14 years to do, and you might have to be doing something different. So, anyways, we have all these concerns that are happening there. So that's Yuval Noah Harari.
Hmm.
Third force at play is the work of Nate Hagens, that I think I introduced you to his work, huge
Yes.
impact on my thinking.
Hmm.
Now, Nate Hagens is a less known thinker than Ray Dalio and Yuval Noah Harari. He has a thesis, a grand unified theory of the world that he describes as the Great Simplification. And what Nate Hagen writes about is that we live in this unique time that he describes as this carbon pulse. Now, the carbon pulse is that we've basically taken 4.3 billion years of carbon accumulation on planet Earth since the birth of our planet, and we've extracted it through fossil fuel, mostly in the form of oil and coal, in this 100-year period. So 4.3 billion years of geologic history on our planet that's resulted in all of this accumulation of fossil fuel that we've extracted in this carbon pulse.
Hmm.
Now, we're also past the peak of this carbon pulse, meaning that we are unable to extract efficiently as much fossil fuel as we were able to extract. And I believe the peak of this carbon pulse was in the late 1970s. So we've extended that with certain technology like fracking that we've heard about. But the reality is there isn't an infinite amount of fossil fuel available for us to extract. And what most economic models don't take into account in Nate Hagen's work is the fact that it's assumed that energy availability is an inevitability, meaning
Right.
that we can access energy. Now, some would argue that, well, the energy of the sun is effectively infinite. When the sun's energy goes away, our planet will no longer exist. And so there is some truth to that, but it's not available in the same shelf stable, always available format as a barrel of oil that you can access at any time because it's dependent on weather, it's dependent on seasons, it's dependent on, we don't have the ability to store it in long-term storage in the same way. So all of these economic models, essentially, if you study Donna Mello's work or on the idea of capitalism is based on infinite growth in
Mm.
the confines of a finite system. And
Hmm.
that's the fundamental flaw of capitalism. Now, the counter argument is that human innovation can counteract any physical limitations that we have in the physical world. But at the end of the day, there are only so many molecules and atoms on planet Earth in the physical world. And yes, we can become more efficient with them, but there is a theoretical limit to what it is that we can achieve. So, with all that, in Nate Hagen's work, um, his work basically argues that the current level of consumption that we enjoy on planet Earth is unsustainable. The
Mhm.
level of consumption, just buying stuff, consuming stuff, extracting stuff, it's not sustainable. And as parts of the world catch up, like for example, India and China, and they want to increase their standard of living, it's not feasible to continue on the path that we're on. So,
Mm.
the only viable options are a massive crash, a catastrophic event that takes place where the world falls apart. We get back into sort of world made by hand territory, or what he calls the great simplification and a soft landing. And the soft landing is shifting our level of expectation around physical consumption. And instead of buying a new car every 5 years, buying a new car every 10 years.
Right.
And instead of owning, 10 TVs and consuming 100 units of electricity in a given day, it's, consuming one TV and consuming 30 units of electricity in a given day. So it's a soft landing where we shift our expectations around consumption and consumerism in order to have a much more sustainable path forward and not a catastrophic event where we run out of fossil fuel and the entire system sort of collapses. Okay, so three forces. We've got economic cycles, we've got environmental cycles with Nate Hagens, and then we've got AI from
Mhm.
Noah Harari's work. Enter in the return to real. The return to real is this movement that I started noticing and that I started writing about, which is this shift away from just hustle culture and economic growth and making more money, more toward a pursuit of a life that's filled with meaning in the physical world, not just behind a screen.
Mm.
And what I'm realizing now is I believe that it is a rejection response in response to this confluence of forces that we may not necessarily have the words to articulate what's happening. We might not have done the deep thinking and deep work and deep research that some have done, but that we feel in our heart that the level of consumerism is not sustainable. AI is going to be taking over. So, what does that mean for me? We have this economic cycle. We know that there's just the amount of debt that we have at a consumer level and at a sovereign level here in the United States is unsustainable. And we know that the environment is going to collapse if we continue the extraction mining based paradigm to just take the natural resources from Earth in order to preserve a standard of living that we've gotten used to. And so this return to real is a movement far that's much more focused on seeking awe and wonder in the mundane
Mm.
and living a life that is far more in tune with nature and one that requires far less consumption and economic activity than we may be used to. So I know that's a big, long sort of like explanation around this idea. It's the best job I can do in this moment to synthesize these forces that are happening. These are undeniable forces. They are happening right now. And what I believe is a movement that's showing up, and variations of this movement have shown up in the past. We've seen it with the Romantic movement in response to the Industrial Revolution. We've seen it in terms of the arts and crafts movement in the great mechanization that took place in the early 20th century. We've seen it show up in the Back to Land movement in the 1960s and 1970s, post World War II. We've seen it show up in the digital detox movement that we are experiencing right now. So this is nothing new. This type of response, I believe there's something fundamental in our biology that we reject to some degree these artificial forces and want to go back to a life that's more connected to nature and the natural world. So I'll pause there because I know that's like a whole lot to take in and think about, but hopefully that distillation gives us a good jumping off point.
So good. Oh man, it's so good. Yeah, I have like all these competing thoughts now. Like, well, one, just first, thank you for again, like kind of giving this masterclass because to really highlight where I see you as a great thinker is that you can absorb all this information. You can look at these patterns and then give kind of I wouldn't say a summary, but like a more high level, this is the important things you need to know. Now, it's up to everyone to interpret that and go find their own truth. But when we have conversations, there's just a level of kind of trust. I'm like, yeah, I feel like Ryan's done his research. I feel like he's seeing the things other humans don't see. And that's a very small percentage. In other words, I would use the metaphor when I'm up climbing and I'm up on a mountain. I feel things and experience things that I cannot feel down below. And
Mhm.
so I see you on these different mountains as you look and observe and listen and inform your own like well researched thesis and thought models, et cetera. So thank you for that. I also want to acknowledge that if you're not aware of the power and impact of AI, it's time to wake up.
Yeah.
I kind of neglected it for a while. Now I'm paying attention. I'm looking to it as a thought leader and a tool. And while I don't embrace the doom and gloom, like they're going to take over, it is a possibility that they will drastically replace lots of human tasks, endeavors, functions, as they already are starting to do, right? The last thing that I just want to kind of reflect from that is that the Nate Hagen, when you first told me about Nate Hagen's, aside from the data, and then I went and watched his presentation that he did several years ago, it was so, that was one of those things that as I looked at it and formed my own opinions, beliefs, worldviews, I was like, oh shit, this is real. And to distill it even further for people, you gave me a really nice awareness that we're getting to the point where when humans, we use enough energy to create one unit, and we're about to the point where that energy is only providing one unit. Now, there's a much more complexity involved there, but it's
Unit
like,
of energy. Yeah. The,
yeah,
the the amount of energy required to extract a unit of energy is approaching a unit of energy.
there we go.
Meaning the fracking as an example, the amount of energy required to extract a unit of fossil fuel is approaching a unit of fossil fuel. At which point we're not actually producing net on a net basis any additional fossil fuel. All the fossil fuel that we have access to is just to replace what we have right now. Now, once that skews just a bit further in that direction where it's 1.1 units of energy
Mhm.
to extract a unit of energy and we're net negative, then you're actually not making any progress. You're spending more money. It's like if you were spending money and you're investing in your business, as an example, and every $100 you spend and invest in your business only makes $90 in return, eventually you're going to go broke.
Right.
So that's where we are right now. And I think there is like the optimist in me wants to believe, which I have a lot of hope around, that the breakthrough in AI is going to prolong, it's going to extend this window of time, that there'll be innovation and breakthrough technology that we will discover through the power of AI. In the same
Mhm.
way that I just watched this really fascinating interview, the head of Google's DeepMind, who just won a Nobel Prize for his work. It used to take, I believe, 2 years to synthesize a protein in the human body. So it would take
Mhm.
2 years of computational power and effort and energy to identify a single protein and map it. So at a molecular level, map that protein in the human body. And using AI, don't quote me on the exact numbers, but will illustrate the point. In the last year, we were able to do 200.
Mm.
Previously, it would take 2 years to do one. We just did 200 in 1 year, and that number is increasing exponentially, where we're eventually will be able to map every protein in the human body. And that unlocks all sorts of innovation in medicine,
Mm, right.
and genetic technology and so on and so forth. So I believe that there is what's interesting is that there is this counteracting effect that I believe AI will have where we will extend the window. That's like the optimist in me that wants to believe that, but it's not guaranteed and it's not a foregone conclusion. And then we have to ask ourselves, not on a macro level, but on a micro level, where do we want to play in this ecosystem?
Right.
Meaning, do we want to be in front of a computer interacting with AI on a day-to-day basis? Or do you want to be out in the woods, or in your case, out on a mountain and
Mhm.
hiking the mountain? Because every yes is 1,000 no's.
Mhm.
everything that you say yes to is saying no implicitly to 1,000 other things. And I think that's the choice that we need to make on an individual level is form your own worldview,
Hmm.
form your own thesis of where things are headed in the world, and knowing what you know, what are you going to do with that information? Are you going to exist within the system and be just an ant carrying a crumb among other ants carrying crumbs? Or are you going to exist outside the system and be a sovereign being and decide, I see this playing out in the landscape. This is how I see the chessboard playing out. And I'm not going to play the game.
Mm. Yep.
I'm going to play my own game over here. And so I think that's like a very individual thing that we have to decide. And again, it's easy to say that, when you're not thinking about the practical realities, economic realities of life. We all got to earn a living. We all got to, make choices. And at the same time, I believe that with courage, there is a lot more available to us than maybe we might react on the surface as being an option. So those are some.
Totally, man. I
Yeah.
totally. You said a powerful word, sovereignty,
Mm,
which has this connection to freedom, but like you said, making choices that
mm,
align with like your deepest values and your ability in my world is like your ability to be fully expressed. You also mentioned something when we were just hanging out the other day. You used a word called austerity, which me and the other guys found really interesting and it's interesting because it's not used a lot.
mm.
I will let you speak to it, but when you said it, it's again one of those things where I'm like, yep, that is the answer. It's the harder choice for the easy life. It's the one that requires courage. Can I live a sovereign life and choose austerity instead of having all this stuff, creating all this like material abundance, and then what I think happens, we actually create more stress, more pressure, more yeses in our life. And it's like, how did I get here? So while austerity is challenging, in some ways it can actually be the answer.
100%. So austerity oftentimes is used in the context of government spending,
Mhm.
meaning we're going to spend less money. And it involves raising taxes or keeping taxes where they are, cutting government programs, spending less money, and that's not a very palatable political argument to be made. You don't win a lot of votes by making that argument unless it is dire circumstances, and that's the
Mhm.
only choice.
Right.
But we can adopt this on a personal household level as well. And I believe it's, looking at that as an unenviable choice is a choice, meaning you can look at that and say, oh, I could never do that. Or you could look at that and embrace that challenge,
Hmm.
seek comfort in the discomfort.
Right.
One thing that I'll share when you said something a bit earlier, I have this phrase that I started to use in some of my writing, and I believe it's at the center of what we're talking about right here, which is to give yourself permission to follow the contrarian voice of your heart.
Mm.
And what that means is that in this world where algorithms sweep us up and we see things on social media and we live increasingly in echo chambers that validate pre-held assumptions that exist in the world, that when you opt out of that system and you actually adopt an independent thinker's mind, be curious, ask questions, seek truth.
Hmm.
That's like my life mantra. Ask questions, be curious, seek truth.
Yep.
And when you adopt that independent thinker's attitude, of making up your own mind based on the evidence that you see, the empirical data that's in front of you, making up your own mind, not because someone had an opinion, you're just kind of following it blindly, but you are deciding that you believe in this. And I believe my friend Todd Herman wrote something the other day that I thought was really interesting, and it aligns with what I believe to be true, which is deeply held beliefs held loosely.
Mm.
That mean? You've got deep conviction in your beliefs based on your research and what you believe to be true, but you hold them loosely. You give yourself permission to be wrong. You give yourself permission to evolve as
Yes.
a thinker. What you believed last year doesn't necessarily need to be something that you believe forever. And I think we vilify that in our modern society where we treat that as flip-flopping. Oh, Ali thought this and now he thinks this. He's a flip-flopper. No, he's growing.
Right.
And if you have a fixed belief in something that you never change your mind because you're too stubborn or you don't want to confront that with your ego, that is not a sign of strength. That is a sign of weakness.
Mhm.
So deeply held beliefs held loosely, I think, is a approach for life that can serve us, whatever may come our way.
Dude, and you're energetically, like your body language, it's not just the words. Like I sense you believe in this.
Yeah.
This aligns so strongly with two things that I also live by. The first is stay curious.
Mm,
This is when the deepest learning occurs for me. It's those moments where I'm like, no, 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 no. I learned this, and my ego starts fluttering around, dancing, like convincing me. But if I can stay curious, there's always something else to learn.
yeah.
The second thing is a quote we say in my house a lot, especially with my children, and something I have to, consistently honor and check myself on, and it's that we learn nothing when we're right. Now,
Mm,
it doesn't mean you can't say right and wrong. Those are, useful labels at times. But when I'm right, I just keep going and I forget to think again. I forget to consider that the opposite could be true. So I love that, man. And one of the last big questions I have for you, which you may have already answered, but I'll allow you to expand as much if needed, is what do you want to help people with? I feel like you could help people with so many things.
mm.
You have demonstrated that, but today, in this moment, as you're embodying this return to real, what do you truly want to help people with?
It's so interesting that you asked me that question. The hair in my arms is standing up right
Mm,
now because I've been
mm,
thinking a lot about that. Like I generated my wealth professionally in the digital marketing arena, which just felt
mm,
very utilitarian. It didn't feel like a calling to me. It just feel like, I like to think about the difference between mercenary work and missionary work.
mm.
And that for me was in many ways mercenary work. I
Yeah,
became really good at it and became really skilled in that area. But it was my first mountain, was not my second mountain calling.
right.
And when I think about sort of second mountain, I think about the legacy that I want to leave with my children, with my boys, I think in many ways is what I think about extending to the students, my readers,
Mhm.
clients, the customers that I have the opportunity to touch and impact. And it is really around this idea, how to become an independent thinker
Mm,
complex world,
yeah.
how to synthesize information, how to think strategically for yourself, how to make up your own mind, and how to do it in a way that is as a force for good in
Mm,
the world. And I think for me, that's an evolving journey. It's very much an evolving journey. And for me, that palette is the newsletter that I write. As you know, I've got 4 or 5 books that I'm in the process of writing. I've got a book that is tentatively titled The Independent Thinker's Playbook. I've got a
totally.
book that is titled The Return to Real. I've got a book
Mm,
around fatherhood. I've got a book around a number of these different concepts that I want to get out there in the world to help people become better thinkers and have both the courage to act on those beliefs and the grit to pursue whatever it is that you feel called to pursue in the face of failure when you skin your knees on the pavement, because you're going to skin your knees on the pavement in this journey. Yeah, I think it's that it's with impacting the world with my writing, and that's what I feel called to do, at least in this season of life,
mhm,
and
mhm.
for for the next few years.
Dude, yes. I mean, I can vouch that you've helped me become a more independent thinker. And I know you're inspiring people. I know there's times where it feels hard. I sense that. And this is what I believe the world needs. So thank you.
Thank you, man.
I have a few just fun rapid fire questions to jam on to close
All
this
right,
out.
let's do it.
All right. First one, what's your favorite book?
My favorite book is always, I feel like, evolving.
Maybe
I would
what's your favorite book right now?
Yeah, I mean, the book that I'm reading right now, Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order, I believe is excellent. Harari's work, I would say Sapiens is probably my favorite. Homo Deus is a close second behind that. I'm a big fan of Malcolm Gladwell and Adam Grant, and
Hmm.
that's kind of my jam. That's my style. Nonfiction, big picture thinking, and books that help make sense of a very complex world.
Sweet, dude. Awesome. You gave us a few to check out.
Yeah.
Question number two. What unique superpower would you choose?
Is this like Marvel superpower, like laser beams
Could
coming from his
be.
eyebrows,
Yep.
or like a realistic superpower, like
Anything. Nope.
6 inches
Anything.
taller? Um, uh, gosh, that's a really good question. Man,
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
I don't have one that's immediately coming to mind. I would say being able to, I don't know, I really enjoy the process of learning. I like what I'll just unpack my thinking and then I'll move on.
Mhm.
Initially, my thought was being able to like instantly learn something,
Mm,
instantly learn a new language, being able to like flip through a book and instantly gather that information. But for me, I have such a love of learning. I feel like it would take away so much joy from
mm,
that experience. Um, I'll answer your question by not answering the question. But what I will say is this: I believe most things in life, the solution is the struggle. The struggle is the
mm,
solution. We
mm,
think that it's the easy button. I want a superpower that's going to get me past this pain and this struggle. But I believe the secret to fulfillment in life is embracing the struggle. And in many ways, the struggle is the solution. So maybe it is no superpower. Maybe
mm.
the superpower is uh,
Ooh.
being a flawed human.
Dude, yes, I love that. All right. Last question. What's your favorite or one of your favorite childhood memories?
So the one that's coming to mind,
Mm,
uh, I went on a camping trip with my cousin, who is 5 years older than me, and who tragically took his own life, passed away
mm,
years later. But one of my most magical memories is that we were canoeing on this lake and just going further than we should have been going. And we stumbled upon all of these wild Concord grapes on the shore.
mm,
We picked all those Concord grapes and we threw them in the canoe, filled the canoe. If you could just imagine, just like our feet, just like the whole canoe. We had no receptacle to store these grapes. We just filled them up and we brought them home and we made them into jam. And for me, it was a magical moment where just stumbling on nature's bounty
mm,
and having like that Swiss Family Robinson type experience. And I would say one of the many, but this is the one that comes to mind, memories that inspired me to take my family on this grand adventure and start a farm. And we've got wild berries and apples
mm,
and nut trees and
mm,
all that. And I'm going to be cooking up some fiddleheads, which are early ferns when they're just not fully unfurled. So when they like just come out of the ground. We've got fiddleheads that'll be cooking up. Just the ability to find food in nature is such a magical experience. And that for me is one that I remember vividly when I was probably 8 or 9 years old.
Wow, what a memory, dude. Yes. See, it maps back to what you said towards the beginning of this conversation, is finding the awe in the simple, the mundane, which essentially becomes majestic, man.
Yeah,
Wow, I was there. I was there with you in the canoe. I saw it filled with grapes. Like, oh, look at all these grapes, like kids would do. Oh, and then making jam, dude, that's icing on the cake.
yeah, man.
Oh, all right. Ryan, thank you, brother. You are a gift to me in my world, my life. I appreciate you. I love you. You're a gift to the world in helping us think better. So thank you for being here, creating some space. Anything else left unsaid?
Right back at you, man. I mean, you're one of the good ones. You're one of the special ones.
Mm,
I'm really grateful to have you in my life. Like
mm,
there are a few people that I think about that, and I genuinely mean that. And I'm just really grateful that you're in my life. Grateful that you're a friend, and you're just one of the most generous souls who pours into everything that you do, whether it's a podcast, a
mm,
conversation like this,
mm.
treehouse that you build for your kids, micro gardening,
Yep, yep, yep.
or whatever it may be. So, right back at you, man, and
Mm,
really enjoyed this conversation.
thank you, brother. I received that.